Welcome back to the On Adventure podcast. I'm Josh Self, and I'll be your host. As you may have noticed, I took a break over the last month or so to catch my breath and get ready for a new season of On Adventure. I couldn't be more excited to officially kick off Season 4 with a conversation like this one. Before we jump in, I want to take a second and have you think about this. What happens when everything familiar gets completely wiped away and you're forced to meet yourself exactly where you are? Today's conversation is one of those rare ones that stays with you long after the mic is off. I'm sitting down again with Robbie Lenfestey. And if you heard our last conversation in episode 21, you already know this isn't just small talk. We're talking about mindset, resilience, leadership in crisis, and what it really means to stay grounded when life gets very real very fast. Robbie lived through Hurricane Helene in the mountains of North Carolina, and not just as a spectator, but as someone responsible for land, community, and people who suddenly had nowhere else to go. From disaster response to nervous system regulation, from flow state to deep personal responsibility, this conversation goes places most of us don't slow down long enough to explore. This is about adventure, but not the Instagram version. This is about who you become when there's no way out but through. Let's get into it. Robbie Lenfestey, welcome back to the On Adventure podcast. And even though this will be our second released episode, this is actually the third time that we've recorded a conversation, because you probably remember the first one, something glitched with Zoom, and this was in my early days of figuring this podcast thing out. So we totally lost a great conversation. But round two was awesome. That was almost 2 years ago to the date, which is hard to believe. And a lot has happened in both of our lives over that 2 years. So we'll talk about that. But I'm really excited to have you back on here. And what I recall of our last conversation, I'm sure will carry over into this, is that it was very deep and thoughtful and meaningful from your own life experiences. And that's the everyday explorer. That's what adventure is all about, is living your great life right now, not some vague point in the future. And so I'm excited to catch up with you and hear what's going on, but thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm glad to be back. Definitely been a dynamic 2 years since the last time that we've talked, and really grateful for your podcast, and your mission is really near and dear to my heart. So I'm happy to be here.
Cool. Well, I think the big event that obviously anyone that at least that's listening to this in the United States will recall in the last 2 years was Hurricane Helene. And where you're located in the mountains outside of Asheville, North Carolina, just epic destruction at proportions that in different areas where it's really hard to fathom. And from what I understand, there's still sections of the mountains that are unusable, unpassable. And that's the least of the issues. I mean, the amount of human suffering that occurred because of what happened is hard to wrap our minds around. But you were in the middle of that. And I think in a couple different ways. One, you had to experience that. And I'm actually curious, having been on your property with that beautiful mountain stream running through the middle of it, what happened to your property? But then you were also in the middle of the charity that took place to take care of those suffering. And it wasn't just days or weeks, it was months that this carried on. So tell us a little bit about what happened and what that was like to live through Hurricane Helene.
Sure. Happy to. Well, I'm kind of one of the things that I kind of like to geek out on is meteorology. Like I like looking at long-term models. I like picking out the patterns for myself. And the pattern here is something that I actually saw coming, and I started to get alarmed about at least a week before, that this could be something way beyond what we expected. And then we got the message that, okay, it's actually going to go slightly to the west of us. And we're like, all right. No, it didn't. It smacked us right front and center. And as far as impact goes, this watershed specifically is one of the most highly impacted that exists. So we were in the crosshairs, so to speak. As far as Mandala Springs is concerned, we only lost one of our out structures, and by the skin of our teeth did not lose any of the structures close to the water
Hmm.
because the big log jams that actually this is interesting. This is an interesting fact. So we have a Cherokee sweat lodge. It's like made out of sticks. It's a dome. You bring hot stones and put them in the pit, and you cover it in blankets. And we had a Cherokee elder who would lead the sweat lodge, which is great. Purification. It's like
Hmm.
Native American sauna, but very prayerful in that regard. That sweat lodge caught some little branches, and then bigger branches got caught behind those, and then entire trees got caught behind those. And that log jam that the sweat lodge started redirected the power of the water to the other side of the stream and spared
Uh,
all of our structures.
are you serious? Wow.
If you walk across the stream and look across, you can see upstream of the sweat lodge and that log jam, the whole bank is destroyed and undercut. And then you see after the log jam, that damage got redirected to the other side by the nature of the log jam. So
Was that upstream from where your house is located?
the sweat lodge itself is directly below my house.
Directly below, and then you had a big yurt there also, correct?
Yep, the yurt was spared because of that, and
Yeah,
so
I
was
mean,
my
what I
so was my
recall, the
all the
yurt and
structures. Hmm.
I mean they were literally right on the banks of the stream. So you're saying the sweat lodge sent it to the opposite side of the hill,
That's
away
right.
from your house and away from, man, you couldn't have designed that better yourself.
Well, case in point, one of my neighbors just upstream of me, I have a video of this, by the way, watched their house get picked up, turned 90 degrees, and then crushed, and it disappeared, like as if it
Oh
never
my
existed.
gosh.
It was in moments. Like it was surreal to witness. And luckily, it's an old couple that lived there. Their son lives in the house next door. About 5 minutes before the house got picked up, his spidey sense went off. He went over there. He's like, "You need to get out now." He pulled his elder parents out of the house, and moments later, their house was gone, absolutely gone. So that was upstream, like
Whoa.
so. Needless to say, it was devastating. As the storm was coming, I was on my tractor with my backhoe in the pelting rain, digging channels to try and get water to go away from structures. So not just the water coming down the stream, but the water coming off the side of the mountain
Mhm.
was at a devastating flood level. Hillsides became like waterfalls, and eventually it was a losing battle. But I think that the net effect of my efforts, basically spending all night in the rain on my tractor, was helpful. But
Mm.
the very next day, I mean, it was very clear, you know, everything was different. The canopy of forest that used to cover the stream
Mhm.
and shade it was gone. All of the rocks laid bare. Everything fresh and new. Looked more like a stream up in the high elevations in the Rockies than it did a stream in southern Appalachia. And that was the whole
Wow.
region got scoured, whereas there was a canopy that interlaced over the stream. Now there's a 100-foot wide gap with no vegetation at all, which ironically, after a season of things starting to recover, is actually kind of a nice effect. There's a lot of sunlight, you know. Truth be told, it's not a net negative all around. There's actually some benefit and beauty. I mean, it did reset the waterfalls, it reset the swimming holes, you know. Some
Reset
areas,
meaning there, what was there before is not there, and now there's waterfalls in different places.
there are points even on Mandala Springs property where the bottom of the creek was 15 feet higher, and there's parts where it was 15 feet lower, and everything in between that completely got shuffled.
Oh
So
my
you think
gosh.
15-foot waterfall, that's a big waterfall.
Yeah.
There are new waterfalls and new swimming holes everywhere. Any amount of familiarity that one may have had with the stream prior to the hurricane, fundamentally different. And that effect was tremendous at Mandala Springs, but the further downstream you go, it was just even exponentiated further.
Well, what was that like in the middle of the storm? Were there any moments when you got water coming from all areas, not just down your stream? I would imagine it would have felt like you were trapped. And were you ever at any point worried that there was no way out and this could be it?
So imagine, if you will, it's like really, really early in the morning and nighttime.
Mm.
All right, that's when things get really hairy. I am wide awake. The adrenaline is flowing, but there's also a calm. And I'm on my tractor, and I've got a halogen light in my headlamp and trying to see through the rain. And I keep hearing, and you can feel. So these some 30-foot by 15-foot massive boulders that got pushed literally like 30 feet downstream. So these massive boulders rolling in the creek as the water is thundering past whole sections of forest, because there is massive landslides happening
Hmm.
above me, and all of a sudden there'll just be a surge, and this fist of trees will just be pile driving down massive boulders, like, thousands of tons
Yeah.
getting moved. So you can feel these big percussive shakes. So I'm on my tractor and all this, and I'll just feel this like boom, and I'll hear this massive cracking explosive sound again and again and again, of an entire side of the mountain giving way, and all of the rock and all of the vegetation just just grinding down the side of the mountain. And then, like clockwork, I could pay attention. A few minutes later, suddenly there will be a massive roar and surge from the creek as the effects of that landslide. So my biggest concern, it's like the rain, it's like I'm redirecting water to try and save my structures. I succeeded in that for the most part, with only minor flooding to my home and a few of my other, like my chocolate factory and things like that. But the biggest concern for me is what if I'm next with those big cracks and
Yeah.
booms?
And there's
That
nowhere to go.
landslide, yeah. If a landslide decided to happen in that moment, that was it. So there was this very real thought in the back of my mind that that was happening all around me. I could hear it happening downstream of me and a lot upstream of me. And so, you know, that was just something that I had to be aware of. But at the end of the day, woke up in the morning and everything was different. The road was completely gone, just a few hundred feet below my house. And what I didn't know at the time was that the road was completely gone in 20 different places between me and just the fire department in Barnardsville, in the same town. And that not just gone, but an entire canyon ripped through it, that in such a way that it looked like it had been there always.
Yeah. As
Like
if the road had never existed.
as if the road had never existed, and all of the way the stream was running through it, just like it had always been there. Like it like that's just where it went.
Wild.
And so, you know, this is a moment where all of my training comes into action, and it's not just my training in primitive skills and survival, but it's all of the collective effect of the ordeal, that the various ways that I've stretched myself, that I've grown, the constant drive to stand on that precipice of my own capacity and my own edges, like the places where I have the most trepidation. The lifetime of that leads to a nervous system that is designed for like emergent realities and is able to stay calm,
Hmm.
able to be focused. And it's just like, in a lot of ways, I drop into my best self immediately. It's like I take inventory of all my people. I figure out what the whole group of people at Mandala Springs, there were people here that didn't even live here who ended up being here for about 6 weeks because they couldn't leave.
Wow.
But they became my responsibility as the leader of this community. That was my responsibility. So I needed to, first and foremost, tend to both the physical needs were less important at first as the emotional needs, the relational needs, because people who don't necessarily share similar nervous system qualities, what just happened can be quite traumatic
Oh yeah.
and completely dysregulating. So
What did that look like? I mean, what I'm imagining with you, and it doesn't surprise me that this was like, your Superman moment from all the training that you had done. It's like, let me put my not to over dramatize this, but put my cape on because I'm ready for this event. 9 out of 10 other people are not going to be ready. And so dysregulation in that moment is probably pretty normal. I'm sure, you tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure you had fear through all of that, which is always a baseline for courage, but fear can also be the baseline for I'm just going to lose my marbles. I can't function right now. That kind of dysregulation. So
that's right.
what did you see in other people in this moment?
I mean, I think you nailed it. Fear definitely can either lead to courage and expansion, or it can lead to very real trauma. And
Same event, same experience,
that's right.
two completely different psychological outcomes.
Absolutely. And something that became really obvious. It really took many months actually for it to become obvious, and even a year in now, really to understand how much trauma people experienced and how bad it was. And honestly, this ice storm,
Mhm.
Fern, that
Yeah.
just came, that luckily did not actually impact us, just the threat of a natural disaster, I got to see very keenly the amount of trauma that
Mm.
still exists in the collective nervous system of this region, and how very otherwise very regulated people were having visceral terror at the idea of this ice storm because of what we experienced with Hurricane Helene. So yeah, and for anyone who has the tools and the capacity to remain calm in emergencies, I've been tested many times in India. I had somebody fall on a rock climb. They broke a bolt and they fell and smacked their head and their eye burst out and they were like
Oh,
hanging there. And it was this moment where I, like, it's like your nervous system has a chance. The other people I was with, like, some of them started to panic. They froze and they're frozen. They don't know what to do. And it's like I'm grateful that I have a nervous system that in that moment like automatically regulates and starts to be like, okay, what is the next step? Then what's the next step? Let's like just it's like something takes over that just takes the rational next step. Because not only am I needing to take care of this emergent situation, which by the way, this guy, German kid, ended up living because we were able to rescue him out of there. Lost his eye, but was able to live, which I'm really, really grateful for. It was a pretty wild story that we can go into another time. But I'm not just managing this situation, I'm simultaneously providing a regulated nervous system for the other people who are panicking in this moment.
Yeah.
And Helene was no different. You know, suddenly we're trapped. 20 different ways we're trapped. No one can get to us. We can't get to them. And for some of the folks that were here on the land, that started to create panic. And you could see the heart rate going up, the speeding up of the voice, getting louder without even realizing it. Even if they're not emotionally acting out, you can see all of these signs that there's this up regulation. So what's the best thing I can do? What's the greatest gift that I've got from this kind of lifestyle, this adventure that I have been on, is my capacity to be the regulated nervous system in the room and to be able to help draw people towards that sense of safety, whether they are aware of that's what I'm doing or not. I'm providing that regulated nervous system that gives them an anchor point to realize it's like everything's actually going to be okay. Someone is in leadership, someone is taking action on our behalf, and that person is calm, confident, and clear. And on a psychological level, that changes everything. And
Yeah,
I did.
the this idea of the group conscience is so powerful in both directions. And so you're sharing your nervous system with other people that are completely offline. And you hear about this in like healthy parenting relationships, adult and child. The child's brain is not developed enough to regulate itself, so it shares the nervous system at times with the adult that should have that figured out. But in adult world, what you're describing, and that can happen in a corporate boardroom or on a professional sports team, or in your case, in the midst of a traumatic, very dangerous situation. In any of these things, it can go both ways too. So yes, you are the stability in an unstable environment for the people around you, but how did you not get pulled out of that? Because that seems to be very easy to do, especially when maybe you're an N of one in a very large group. How were you able to stick with that?
Honestly, like in the early days in my 20s when I was like, free solo rock climbing, for example, when I would go look at a cliff and be like, all right, this is my expression of like trust in a higher power. I'm going to place myself in one of the most dangerous situations possible as an expression of this bigger trust. Probably a lot more going on there around adrenaline and other things in my 20s. But long story short, once you're up there, you're 300, 400 feet up on a cliff. There is no room for fear. There's no room for panic. These emotions in that situation cannot really even happen. And if you ever watched Alex Honnold's Yosemite video, something that people who haven't done this kind of thing in their life, which is most people, wouldn't notice, is the moment that fear struck and that he panicked. He was standing on the ledge with his back to the wall. He was on this little ledge. So he was no longer in that direct experience that automatically calms the nervous system. He was in this inner in between space where then an opportunity for other emotions were able to really like happen.
Mhm.
But in the moment, it's like something takes over that just calms and quiets the mind. The thoughts disappear. There's just empty space. And there's that empty space. And then there's just the awareness of the next action, the next move. Like this arm moves up, grabs this hold.
Hmm.
Okay, that feels safe and secure. Now I can move this foot. Now I can move this other arm. Now I can move this other foot. That kind of dance. And interestingly enough, brain scans have shown that this state is basically identical to like master meditators who've been, Buddhist scholars who've been meditating their entire lives. It's a similar brainwave state that is achieved. So probably one of the most attractive elements of those that choose to do those kinds of things. Similar to just disappearing when I would just walk off the side of a mountain into the woods with nothing but a pair of shorts and figure it out, and by day, by night, like, figuring out how to navigate through the woods, through dynamic terrain, using my other senses when sight doesn't exist anymore.
Hmm.
Just a lifetime of examples of how I was attracted to that edge. And I think part of what attracted me to that edge is because it does compel for the sake of survival, let alone anything else, this deep meditative state. And so that when something like Hurricane Helene comes and people are freaking out, or the guy that, you know, like almost died after the rock climbing fall in India, like it's the same thing. It's like the situation has a similar emergent quality.
Is it the same
And
thing as what you hear if flow state?
it is
Would-
flow state. That's
Okay.
exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Theta
So
brainwaves, flow state.
yeah.
That is what I'm speaking of. And what I've done, it's like in those early days, it's like I I would seek those experiences to find flow state, and then the maturation of that process was being able to stimulate and create flow state at will,
Hmm.
and to be able to navigate negative emotional states, negative habits, you know, childhood trauma patterns and things like that, to be able to navigate them in a way that wasn't burying them, but also wasn't reinforcing them, but
Hmm.
instead finding that beautiful place where I'm actually dissolving them in an active, objective, meaningful way in pursuit of the capacity to be more and more free in my capacity to enter into flow state as a dominant form of my day-to-day experience, because flow state is exquisite.
So you just said you have now figured out how to, I forget the word you just used, but put yourself into flow state
Oh yes.
essentially when you want to. How do you do that?
There is a lifetime worth of tools, and this is actually, so I've been starting to do more lifestyle mentorship and really taking on folks, and this is actually one of the things that I'm working on, whether I express it as helping to unlock the capacity to be in flow state. That's what it's all about ultimately. And there's a multitude of tools that can support this. So one of the most important is being able to have a toolkit to really address the internal world, to be able to address old traumas and old habitual patterns that unconsciously play out in our relationships, unconsciously play out in our relationship to ourselves. And basically, either we come into a relationship with these things, or they continue to assert a control over our lives and diminish our capacity to be able to be fully liberated. So there's a moment where, like, say somebody says something that used to trigger the ever living crap out of me, like my partner would say something and it would just touch me right at the core and it would just trigger all this emotion. Well, instead of blending with that emotion, instead of blending with that experience, I take a peripheral position and I observe. But if the anger's there, or if there's depression or sadness, any emotion, there's patterns to the way that I feel, to the way that I think, and to the way that I act. And so that's being fully blended with those emotions. But if I take that peripheral view, I take that step back and I start observing and being like, all right, I can start asking, because remember, emotions are you. An emotion is an aspect of you. Like, it's completely reasonable. In fact, there's a lot of scientific research, like IFS, internal family systems, is a brilliant system for this. Completely reasonable to start going inside and asking different emotions questions and starting to create a dialogue. That separation, like separating yourself from the emotion, like having a dialogue with it, is critical, because what happens in that moment is I am no longer just unconsciously blended with it. I'm no longer just acting it out. I'm suddenly creating this degree of separation that is allowing me to really analyze, like, okay, where did this start? Oh, like, I had this, it's like there's a part of me that doesn't feel like worthy of love. And that started somewhere. It's like I start going back. I'm like, oh, that started somewhere in my childhood. And I start to realize that the anger that I'm feeling when my partner says the thing to me has nothing to actually do with the thing she said to me, has everything to do with this deep, like, protective response to very old trauma. And I can start moving through the whole experience. And suddenly I find myself in the objective reality where someone says something that would trigger a massive upregulation and activation in my nervous system, and it doesn't phase me, truly. And it's not because I've buried the emotion. I'm not dissociating, because that's another form of that needs to be, there's lots of different ways that this stuff happens, but it's like actively working on the self from this level, to me, is one of the most important things that any human being can do, because the relational and emotional intelligence in our culture, frankly, is at an adolescent level.
Yeah.
And most people will never do the work or even understand that it's possible to do the work to graduate into being an emotional, relational adult, or even understand what that means.
Yeah. Partly because they've never been shown that, right? So as you're describing,
Completely, because
we are all creatures of the habitats that we grew up in, good, bad, or indifferent. And without that kind of separation to look back in from the outside and say, why is this going on? I don't want to continue repeating this thing that keeps coming up. So let's dig a little bit further. But those are, skill sets that take an active pursuit of building a whole new, literally a brain pathway, right? I mean, these behaviors are firing neurons, and one neuroscientist says neurons that fire together wire together.
That's
So
right.
when you do something long enough, that's what a habit is, right? So all of our behaviors, as you pointed out, that start very, very early, some of them are survival techniques, right? I mean, things to protect and get us to be able to survive as a human being. But those survival techniques aren't always useful. And so as adults, being able to separate from that and say, okay, I'm only going to use this skill when I need it, not all the time. It's like you use a hammer all the time, you're going to start breaking stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so help me tie that back in. So I'm with you. Internal family systems, separating from the emotion to be able to see what's going on and really dig into that. That's super helpful to not get wrapped around the axle every time something triggers you. Help me understand tying that back into a flow state where your brain has really turned off the fight, flight, or freeze mechanism and is in really kind of the Jedi mind trick of like, I'm in the moment and whatever the task is, I'm up for it without being completely flooded. So tie that back in together for me.
Yeah, happy to. So basically what you're doing is, because when an emotion comes up, suddenly you get a flare of anger. Maybe you've been just slowly building it, but this is disrupting your entire endocrine system. Your thoughts and emotions are producing hormones and creating the physiological change by actively doing the work to be able to rewire the way that we respond to any stimulus coming into the field. We change our physiological response. And so in a moment, that, like, a lot of in my early 20s, a lot of the free soloing, running out in the woods, I was subconsciously giving myself more of these tools. I was unwinding a lot of things from my past, and I was creating this level of empowerment. It's a lifelong journey. Once I got out of that, I realized, like, relational, emotional leadership level dynamics are completely different realms that I needed to engage in the process with. And that is a lot of what's allowed me to be exquisitely conscious of doing it, instead of just being more regulated automatically, noticing everyone panicking the next morning after the hurricane, and having the conscious awareness that they're panicking and that they're scared, and being able to be naturally but also consciously engaged in the process of keeping my nervous system regulated. What does this look like? It looks like deep, slow, even breathing. If anything, I'm emphasizing the exhale, because inhales are sympathetic nervous system activation. Exhale, parasympathetic nervous system regulation. So even simply being conscious of my breath and taking slow breaths, keeping my heart rate under my control, emphasizing the exhales, bringing more parasympathetic into the field. Suddenly, I am a relaxed nervous system who also happens to be in charge and the leader of this particular organization. And in this case, also this emergent core of disaster survivors. And when people don't feel safe, they're looking for safety. And in our culture, people have any number of tragic ways of trying to meet that need, that sadly result in not getting those needs met, to put it gently. And that's just going to be a part of our culture. All we have control over, and all we have any agency to do, is to regulate ourselves, our own response. And if someone, like, even like blah at me because they're scared, it's like, Do I have the self-awareness to be like, wow, that person's yelling at me right now, but really they're actually really, really scared. And this is something much deeper. It actually has nothing to do with me. Suddenly, there's no hook for them. I'm not responding. I'm not protecting. I'm not physiologically showing any of the signs of any of the responses to that behavior. It has nowhere to land. It dissolves.
Hmm.
It's emotional relational jujitsu. Truly.
I mean, the way you're describing it, it absolutely sounds like that. The breathing that you just went through, I think most of us have heard of breathing techniques, but if you could point someone, that has maybe had a scratch on the surface exposure to learning to breathe and pay attention to breath and using that at times to calm themselves down. That's like kindergarten level stuff. And obviously what you're describing is much more detailed. Where would you point people to discover more about how to do stuff like that?
There, I mean, luckily we live in an era in the last decade or so, breathwork got really
Hmm.
popular. I have a whole YouTube channel called Convergence Lifestyle dedicated to it.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
I'll
where
link I'll link to that in the show notes.
it's fun. I've got videos where I play all the instruments and there's like 10 of me on the screen. I'm doing the breath work and I'm giving the instruction because I was teaching as a big part of my life, like the Wim Hof Method style breath work for years after all of my time with Wim Hof.
And you met Wim before he became
That's
Wim
right.
Hof.
Well, before the method became publicly known. And I'm really grateful for that because I really got to spend a lot of time with him directly before that became something that would be significantly
Yeah.
more difficult to
And tell me if I'm wrong
experience.
on this, though. His method, is it not also just an ancient method of breathing that many cultures over the history of mankind have known and utilized?
Yeah, I mean, even IFS, internal family systems that we just talked about, is is ancient system that was then translated in a way that is digestible to the Western mind
Yeah.
and makes it a system that can be utilized. Wim Hof method is the same thing. It's you look at the Tumo people of Tibet, and this Tumo breath work is the foundation of the breath work in the Wim Hof method. Wim went and trained directly with the Tumo people.
Mm.
He'll be the first to say that that's the lineage of the breath work. What he did that was brilliant is he translated it into a super simple, easy to digest format for the Western mind.
Interesting. So that is a tool to, and again, tying this back to the everyday explorer that is doing whatever pursuit of adventure looks significant to them right now. Any adventure is going to have a layer of uncertainty of the outcome, of potentially dangerous or difficulty along the way, and being able to switch into a flow state of sorts, or maybe not of sorts, a flow state to get through that. At some point that switches off, right? And so what I'm curious about through your Hurricane Helene experience is, was it 6 weeks or 6 months or even a year? When did that switch off where the crisis level came down enough to where okay, we're back to a normal day to day? And then at that moment, like when Alex was standing on, looking out instead of on a grip, did it all come flooding back? Did the fear rise in that moment?
You know, we went because basically that, like, by the time when the water got low enough that I hiked out to get to the first place. I didn't know where it would be, but where people would have consolidated, gathered, and been able to create a relief hub, which ended up being in Barnardsville proper. And I'm bringing an empty backpack. I'm hauling 90 pounds of food and two 60-pound things of diesel in either hand.
Whoa.
And it's like a journey that would generally take maybe an hour took like 5 or 6 for me to get out. And then it took 12 to get back because I'm having to lower these diesel cans and this backpack. I've got a little rope and I'm having to lower them down into these little canyons where the road used to be, drop down, and then I'm having to figure out where and how I can get them up. I'm having to lift a 90-pound pack over my head. I'm having to do this whole process 20 different times. And also, like, my arms, when I'm carrying these things, are starting to like seize up on themselves. Like, I'm having to flip them up here, try to carry them. I mean, it's like CrossFit extreme. And this was the beginning. The moment we even had ATV access, that a excavator was able to like carve a path just so an ATV could go, we were starting to deliver water. Flash forward to once we had roads again, we were delivering 7,500 gallons of water a day. We had a water truck. We had multiple vehicles with trailers coming out. We were filling over 420 places all over the region that needed water with our Mandala Springs water. We were building relief housing and housing people that lost their homes. We were fully immersed in the disaster relief at a very high level, like immediately. So there was never a moment for a long time of transition. It was like the immediate disaster flowing directly, literally on the same day that we had the capacity to. We were filling gallon jugs, like milk jugs, and just delivering them. And that evolved into this massive water project. It really was at least 6 months before I really had an opportunity to feel how much of an impact that actually had.
Mm-hmm.
And and really there was a moment where there was a fire there, like at a friend's place, like a bonfire, and everybody was hanging out, and it was just kind of like a decompression sort of thing for our community. And this woman was kind of leading this bonfire, and she's like, I want you to take a moment and just imagine, like, and say what was lost, during this experience. And everybody just popcorn style, just share. And everybody just started sharing the things that they lost and the things that they were grieving, the things that were gone, the things that would never be the same. And that viscerally touched me. And
Mm.
it's like hearing all of these things, it like really opened up the capacity to feel. And that moment, I just sat down on the ground and just started bawling
Yeah.
in that moment. Like it's like the floodgates released all of the grief, all of the sadness, the 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 reality of the fact that life would never be the same, the things that I grew to love and care about, and everything was different. Everything had changed.
And it took
And it
6 months to get to a point where it was safe for you to do that.
That's right. And so,
Yeah,
and
that's amazing.
unfortunately with this ice storm last week that luckily didn't really happen,
Mm-hmm.
like didn't not to the way that it was supposed to for us. I really got to witness how much of that trauma has not been worked out of most people, because most people don't have active toolkits to move through trauma, to actually seek out the grief that's actually there and express it in
Yeah.
themselves, to allow these things to move in a healthy way. Our culture doesn't, like, more and more it's becoming more and more popular, thank goodness. In our culture it's becoming more and more mainstream, but none of us were raised with these tools. Our parents weren't raised with these tools. It's nobody's fault. We came by every bit of it, honestly, but it
Hmm.
is our personal responsibility
Yeah.
to
Mm.
to deal with it in the best way that we can, and to build these toolkits. To me, frankly, it is one of the most important responsibilities we have as a member of any community, of any part. It's like, to me, one of the greatest responsibility to really liberate ourselves in terms of habitual reaction
Hmm.
to any stimulus. We don't want to ever react. And that's what Wim Hof breathwork teaches. That's what the rock climbing, meditation, all of these things help to teach is you develop a nervous system. Even if somebody cuts you off in traffic,
Hmm.
it's like you do the Wim Hof breathwork and training, that translates suddenly in a situation where you would suddenly have a lot of adrenaline flooding through your system and you'd have this whole reaction. You just get a little pulse of norepinephrine that just gives you the alertness, and then you're in full control. Your breathing has not, you've not even missed a single breath in the process. You are not reacting, you are choosing and responding. And that, to me, is where we want to be as individuals, for the sake of being being the best that we can for all of the people in our lives.
You know, our first conversation was all the way back episode 21, 2 years ago, and I titled it No Way Out But Through. And that was kind of a theme of a lot of things you talked about at that point. I would encourage anybody to go back and listen to that. It was such a great conversation. But one of the things you talked about also, and I have used this, maybe I should pay you royalties for this, but I've used this so many times in these conversations about expanding our comfort zone into the growth zone, but being very careful not to go too far into the death zone. And this idea that if we don't constantly push our limits, we're left in this atrophied state where the comfort zone gets smaller and smaller and
That's right.
smaller. And you've done such a good job explaining how you have systematically and intentionally expanded that comfort zone, even if you didn't realize that's what you were doing in the moment through your rock climbing or wandering through the woods, or even, being kidnapped in Argentina. Great
Yep.
part of the episode 21. You got to go back and listen to that. I mean, all of these things kind of stack up to make something like Hurricane Helene the perfect moment for you to shine as the one to be the guiding light through a very difficult time period. I think there was one direction I was going to go with that thought, and I've lost it. But I think another way that I can ask you this is from Helene. I mean, that was a year and a half ago, and I know a lot. There's symptoms of Helene that are still playing out in many parts of the North Carolina mountains. Where has life taken you? And I think this is part of one of the questions I was going to ask you is so much of what you've described, you couldn't have orchestrated this, right? These are, whether we call it serendipity or there's a variety of words we could use about things just happening to Robbie Lenfestey, that you can't make this stuff up, right? So what I'm curious about, first of all, is you mentioned earlier a higher power. Do you have a view of a power greater than yourself? Do you call it higher power? Do you call it God? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And indeed, truth is so much stranger than fiction, always. And I'm really grateful that I started to seek truth. I wanted to uncover what's really behind this, what's really behind that, at a pretty early age. And ultimately, I started to seek God or spirit. To me, the name that we give, like, that force, presence, personality, whatever you want to call it, isn't as important as what is your personal, objective, internally objective, actual embodied relationship to that.
Yeah, I love that you just used the word embodied. And this is something I've thought about a lot and probably exposing a little bit of my own background, but a lot of this spirituality or whatever we want to call it. And I just finished a series in the last 4 episodes around adventure and spirituality, how pursuing hard things can be a canvas to find a connection with this higher power. And what does that look like? But a lot of that, and this is probably evident within the Western world of education, where it becomes very much a head thing, right?
That's right.
And the head becomes disconnected from spiritual standpoint from the body. So you just used the word, I'm bouncing off of this, of an embodied spirituality. So say more about that and what that means to you, if you would.
Well, to me, if we're looking for truth, truly, it has to come from an embodied experience. And if something is being presented to me as a truth, but I haven't experientially, had that experience of that being a reality, then for me, in my perspective and in my journey, that means that I need to dig a little deeper. I need to dig a little deeper. And from a very early age, in my early 20s, I started deep spiritual seeking. And I started really doing it through testing myself in different ways. But, like when I was doing free solo rock climbing, unlike a lot of people that were doing that, like when I did the big climb in Kauai, at 3,000 foot, same elevation as what Alex Honnold did, but in some ways objectively even more dangerous because the quality of rock that I was climbing on was really suspect and
Is
really
this
dangerous.
in the Nepali coast?
In the Nepali coast, yes.
Oh man, that's like, that rock gets somewhat damp and it's like,
it's mud,
glass.
That's right.
Just
so I climbed out of
glass.
I climbed out of the Kalalau Valley, and that's a wild story. I ended up actually getting pulled off the top of the cliff line by a person dangling from a string in a helicopter. It was pretty wild.
Oh my
It all
God.
got filmed as part of a documentary.
Because you were stuck, or that was part of the plan?
No, that was not part of the plan, and I wasn't stuck. That's just what they did.
Okay.
The guy grabbed me and said, "You better hold on tight." Next thing you know, I'm witnessing the entire Nepali coast expanding away from me. I'm literally being held by this guy dangling from a string under a helicopter. He swings me around the whole Kalalau Valley, drops me off at the helipad near the waterfall at the end of the valley, and leaves. Never asks my name, never any information. That's just it. So I literally climb out of the valley, get swooped up, and brought right back down to the bottom.
Did they do that because you weren't supposed to be doing that?
I most certainly was not supposed to be doing that. And I think that someone on the film crew, because there was a documentary being made, someone on the film crew, I think, panicked. And because there was a big pause in a really sketchy section where it was like extra dangerous, and used the satellite phone and I think called for help.
Oh.
And so it was being done altruistically, just misguided. Wild experience. A documentary is called Drop In, Drop Out, 11 Miles to Paradise. It's available online. It's out there. And that is the climax of the documentary, is me and a Hawaiian kahuna, a shamanic Hawaiian practitioner, elder named Tiki, us making that climb. But here's the thing, this is the tangent here. When I was doing those things, I was picking and choosing this because I'm like, all right, I trust I have this objective experience of the divine by whatever name. I am in direct experience of it in my body. Like I am building this authentic relationship to it. I'm going to climb this cliff. I'm not going to use any ropes, and I'm going to do it as an expression of, like, a visceral expression of my trust in that relationship.
Wow.
And I'm going to bring that intention and that quality of attention to this entire experience. Every single move that I make, I am placing myself completely in the hands of God in that regard. And I am taking this visceral action that is an expression of, like, mortal courage, essentially. That was, and this moment of climbing the Nepali cliff line in Kalalau was no different. In fact, the morning that we left, a monk seal came and landed on the beach, and we took that to be a really good sign for the whole journey. And I've found myself with spiritual teachers, people who don't just have deep wisdom, but are I've witnessed people able to do things that would really just that completely break down the Western understanding of human nature and what is possible. I have had repeated experiences throughout my entire life of things that completely shatter the Western model of life and reality in a way that actually shows that there's so much more going on. It's like
Can
what
you think of one or two examples that you could share obviously we don't have all afternoon for you, but what would be examples of what you just described?
I mean, I have from the age of 20 onward, I have many, 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 and we could do an entire series of podcasts on those experiences. But that's part of the gratitude. By seeking these things my whole life, I've gotten to experience a life that where I have been there's a normal capacity to experience inexplicable phenomenon.
I like the way you put that.
And not just like in my own little bubble of myself, but in group settings, like where there's like a collective witness, essentially, to the inexplicable. Very much something that responds to us seeking it, like, and actively really seeking it, not just wishing for it, but like getting out there. I've got stories of stone circles in Ireland that are wild. The Wampus cat. I mean, dear God, multiple people, including myself, have seen this animal here at Mandala Springs. There's two whole podcasts that were created just off of the story of me and my friend Man, my Lebanese friend, who seeing this 12-foot long, 4-foot tall, covered in thick white fur, long tail with a puffed at the end, and a very awkwardly small wolf-shaped head cat-like creature that is a well-known cryptid, I guess, as you would call it, of this region, associated with the Southern Appalachian Mountains in Cherokee. Ironically, that I had never heard of before until one morning walking on the land. I heard a noise, looked up, and this thing was staring at me from the top of a boulder, all curled around itself. And then it literally leapt off the boulder and just started running down the side of the mountain. Massive, huge muscles, small, awkward shaped head on big, broad shoulders. And it was just crushing trees and crushing things under its feet. And it just ran straight down the mountain in front of me, right across my path, like about 30 feet away from me. And it didn't look at me again. It kept its head forward, and it ran down the mountain. And then once it reached a boulder below me, it curled back around the rock and disappeared. Now, my friend had recounted the experience of seeing it a few months before. And even though I've experienced so much that can't be explained in my life, part of me was like, man, is he a little crazy? I don't know. Like what he's describing is really pretty wild, dimensionally speaking. And also, as an ecologist, very clearly can tell you nothing like that exists here.
Hmm.
He has no understanding of ecology. He's originally from Lebanon. And the thing that really struck me was he was very honest and earnest. He's like, so what kind of animal is this? Like he didn't know that that was something that was not, at least from a accepted perspective, not an animal that is here, which,
So a Wampus cat is not supposed to exist, and yet two of you have seen it.
oh no, more than that. So once I saw it, I started, the NC Board of Tourism actually interviewed me on this, and they have a whole podcast interview on it online. Once I saw it, I started doing research, and then I started asking my neighbors, and that was a nervous moment. I'm like, man, these good old boys, like, I don't want to sound crazy to my neighbors,
Mm-hmm.
but it was compelling enough. And the fact that two of us had seen it, it's like, I felt safe asking, because I was like, you know what? I guarantee you I'm not going to sound crazy, because I guarantee you if I've seen this, whether
Other
or not
people have.
they've seen it or not, they're going to have friends that did or family that
Mm-hmm.
did. The first three people that I asked in this cove who've been here multi-generationally all told me their own firsthand experiences of
Wow.
seeing it. The Cherokee elder that used to do Sweat Lodge share, the moment I asked him, he's like, I haven't seen it, but he recounted his brother's experience of seeing it. So come to find out, and in this case, you know what? I don't actually believe that it's like even necessarily esoteric. It's just like such a massive animal, and it probably has such a huge territory. An adult mountain lion can have a 300 square mile territory that it's able to maintain as a solo lion.
Wow.
So a creature this big, how big of a territory does it have? It's completely reasonable to me that it could evade, the the kind of scrutiny that would make it, you know, of fact that it exists from a Western scientific provable perspective. It doesn't have to necessarily be like a Bigfoot to me.
Mm-hmm.
It could
Mm-hmm.
literally just be that rare and that elusive. But
But what meaning do you take out of that? So other than like being a very cool experience, what the I think the human brain is a make sense meaning making machine.
that's right.
And so when you look at these experiences that you can't make up, you can't really design it in advance. What does that mean to you?
What it means to me is confirmation of the real adventure that is actually available to every single one of us, which is the real frontier of the edge of what we have habitually come to believe is possible and what truly is possible. To break down all of the assumptions that we hardwired into our bodies from childhood based on the mundanity of the culture that we were raised in, and to realize, to have experience after experience that that strips away your capacity to even believe in the reality of the mundane as an option, to get that confirmation, to have the courage to continue to expand our awareness, to expand our capacity to control our attention. Our attention is the thing that social media companies are buying and selling, that marketers are
Mm-hmm.
buying and selling. It's the most valuable commodity on the planet, is human attention. Like, I own my attention. I do not give my attention to anything or anyone outside of my conscious purview. And that is a skill that we cultivate. And we live in a world where there has never been more sophisticated traps for our attention.
Mm.
They're algorithmically AI, like perfectly tailored to capture attention, which a little bit of righteous anger, I think, is actually healthy to be able to say, no, I will not be commoditized. My attention will not be commoditized. So I expand my attention. I start practicing using my peripheral vision. I start expanding using my senses in different ways. I walk in the woods in the pitch black darkness and I learn how to use my senses differently, which expands my attentional capacity, which then allows more inexplicable experiences to be frankly experienced in my life. It's an objective reality. It doesn't require any sort of woo-woo new age, like loosey-goosey sort of stuff. Like there is a very pragmatic, very objective path that can be taken to this frontier where we are starting to tap into this wider range of the fundamental inherent capacity that an embodied human experience contains. And you start to understand how repressed and how atrophied like the vast majority of people in our culture have become, that so much of that latent potential that exists within the human experience is not even coming online. When people look at brain scans, are like, oh yeah, humans only use 10% of their brain. My response to that is, that's how much people in our culture are using. That's not an actual extension of what should be or is
What's
possible
possible?
in our natural state. We're just so far removed from our natural state that things that I'm experiencing that seem inexplicable, that seem magical, are actually part of what should be, in a healthy environment, foundational and normal.
Hmm.
Like my experiences, in my opinion, should not be exceptional. And that's my goal, is to support people in awakening these things up, because ultimately there's objective tools. It's a path that can be walked systematically to break things down and start opening up the capacity to, and that's the frontier, man. That's where the real adventure exists, is really expanding our awareness and our capacity to enact that level of freedom within ourselves, in the world, through our work, through our families, through our relations, through our experiences.
Yeah, and so it's not even a mental expansion. We were talking about the brain. It's not just a mental expansion of possibility. I think you're describing, as we said earlier, like an embodied, real experience of life being much more connected than we were led to believe, or that we were taught, or that we experienced earlier in our lives. I'm curious if you listen to any of what has become fairly mainstream in the last couple of years, the telepathy tapes.
Oh, I have actually, and I think that is fantastic, because that's helping more and more people tap into something that is outside of the standard model.
Yeah.
and and it's happening in such a mainstream way that it's actually creating a larger, wider, safer permission slip for people to get curious about what is actually possible in ways that used to be taboo, tragically.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know where this goes back to. It might be several hundred years as education progressed, but where we became very disconnected from the immaterial world, that if it wasn't material, it wasn't true and it didn't exist. And so what you've described a lot in the last hour and what the telepathy tapes are talking about, and we could overlay mystics that have been labeled, this term of mystic is it really kind of, well, they see things a little bit different than everybody else, or gurus of other traditions. To me, I could be totally off on this, but it just seems like they're all using different language to point to a very similar thing of this. The world is so much larger into the immaterial side that we don't typically experience. And so what I'm taking from this and super jazzed to have this conversation is your experience of living and pursuing this expansion intentionally, but without manipulating it. You've intentionally pursued it, but these things have occurred to you over several decades, whether it's the Wampus cat or something else, that you can't make this stuff up. In fact, why don't we end with you telling us what you mentioned before we started recording about your trip to Costa Rica. This is very recent and maybe in the same idea of pursuing being present in what you're doing, and then lo and behold, these other things occur to expand your whole experience of it.
Yeah. And if you ever look into things like the law of attraction, there are some nauseatingly woo-woo elements of the way that stuff is taught. But if you like strip away a lot of the fluff of that, what is being talked about is a very real aspect of reality. And that is what over and over again, the calibration, the internal calibration, it's like, we're all basically like radio receivers, right? Consciousness is out there. There's many facets of it. We're like these very complex radio receivers, and we're receiving a little frequency here, a little frequency there, and we're synthesizing that into our lived experience. That's how I interpret basically the way that my body works. This is the way that I've come to understand the inherent intelligence that is built in to these, inexplicable tools that we have as our bodies. And what I've learned is the more actively I'm tuning my radio and I'm figuring out which frequencies I don't want to be tuned to, emotions, habits, physical experiences, you name it, figuring out the ones I want, I tune my body. And then that's when I can experience objectively again and again, like ridiculous, comical levels of serendipity in my life. Just the number of stories that I have. Part of what makes the adventure story that I got, that I'm, even writing the book about, literally, and why I've had this many experiences that were just so wild, and why I will continue to do so, is because I've tapped into this essential principle, this objective principle of life, which is creating that attentional space, tuning my own receiver so that I am attracting the kinds of life experiences that I want, and things that I would never expect. Case in point, Costa Rica, went to help my partner Eleanor's aunt move out of a house that she's lived in for 20 years. And just so happened that we got invited to stay in I think like $18 million mansion overlooking the ocean, 180-degree views, infinity pool, for completely free. 5-minute walk to the beach. And from that place that we were staying, someone else that we were connected with in our field, like within the network, her and her husband couldn't go to this all-inclusive fancy retreat with a famous yoga instructor in one of the most beloved retreat centers in the world. Many people argue has the single best view from any retreat center in the world. That's called Blue Spirit. in the Nosara area of Costa Rica, we got gifted an all-inclusive, all meals, beautiful room within the center, full week yoga retreat. On top of that, and so we're sitting in this field of gratitude. Gratitude is literally one of the greatest high quality emotions that we can embody in terms of like the physiological impact. Gratitude is such a beneficial place to be, epigenetically speaking, from a hormone production level, but it's deeper than that. And so we're sitting in this field of gratitude, like, wow, we're in this gorgeous mansion with this infinity pool, 5-minute walk to the beach, like, and this is life. We're simultaneously in awe of, in gratitude for, and also, having that little like wink of like, this is actually, this
Not
level of
surprised.
serendipity is what we expect. Eleanor and I in Malta had a similar experience. The moment we connected, which was what started this phase of our relationship, because we've known each other for 12 years, we literally come together. We're going for a walk. First moments that we've connected. And she's like, I want a coffee. Like, maybe we should check out this hotel and see if they have coffee. We walk in and we're just in this, in love, in this like flow state. It's all flow state, right? And the person running the hotel is like, well, we don't sell coffee, but I like you guys. I like what I'm experiencing. I'll make you a latte each. And we sit down and he's making us this latte. And then we go and we see there's this whole cave, like under this building, that we're looking through the door and we can see that there's a big pool and there's like a sauna. It's like this spa. And he comes over and he's like, yeah, you know what? He's like, there's no guests right now using it. If you guys want a free hour and a half, I'll just let you use the sauna. He gave us towels. He gave us everything. And we got this massive limestone grotto spa to ourselves. And this is in the first moments of reconnecting, because we both have that similar capacity for flow state. And when two people who have that capacity come together, it's like you can bounce off of each other and just accelerate that whole process.
Oh, wow.
Same as Costa Rica. This is not luck. This is the important thing to understand. This is the result of a objectively cultivated state. When someone's in flow state, you can feel the difference in that. It's like there is an attraction, there's an attractiveness to flow state. It's similar to the fact that when someone is in, activation, there's a repulsion.
Yeah.
At least from the higher selves, there might be attraction to bouncing off and feeding that activation. That's an unconscious attraction. Those are the kinds of things that we objectively want to work out of our nervous system. And there's so many tools out there, starting even just with that breath control, just being conscious of our breath and slowing our breath down. Like if no one does anything else but that, it's going to make a tremendous difference to their capacity to be regulated. Any emotion, you get angry, like that works itself out of the system if there's nothing reasserting it in 4 minutes. Literally, if you start to feel yourself getting angry and you're having a conflict with someone, if you say, hey, I'm starting to get activated, I need to pause, and you remove yourself from the situation for 4 minutes.
That's it.
Those hormones and the related thoughts and the related actions will move. And then you can come back to the conversation and from a completely different perspective that's not going to upregulate. Because if there's anything I've learned, never once in my life have I gotten the needs met that I was really needing to get met by doing by any conversation that was activated, upregulated. Like anytime I'm upregulated or activated, anytime that I'm triggered, even a little bit, I am now in a place where it doesn't matter what I say, what we do, what we're doing. I'm not going to actually get my needs met. The most intelligent thing I can do for both of us is to pause, remove myself, clear out the hormone, breathe, and come back to it. And attempt using, relational tools like nonviolent communication, authentic relating. These are toolkits that I think are critical for people to study, to be able to learn how to communicate with each other in a way that doesn't trigger and activate, and creates more of a situation where we're actually getting our needs met by each other. That creates the capacity to be in flow state.
I also think what you're describing, this dysregulation, is, I mean, all of us have experienced it. The train goes off the tracks, and depending on how fast the train was going will determine how much destruction is created when it goes off the tracks.
That's right.
And none of us want the outcome that comes from that. So and if I could boil it down to something this simple, that for any of us, any everyday explorers that are trying to live their great life right now, this is one of the biggest hurdles. Our own innate reactions to things, living out of a lower elevated self that hasn't taken the time to understand where these reactions come from, or how we relate to people, or even the world around us. It seems like a giant hurdle to really pursuing our great adventure. And so as happened last time, almost 2 hours flies by, and I'm extremely grateful for your time, but also your experience. I get to learn from these conversations, and I'm reminded today why I left our last conversation 2 years ago so just energized, because you come into this with, as we've already talked about, an embodied experience. Is very different than most interactions in today's world. So, Robbie, I really appreciate it, and hope it's not another 2 years before we do this again.
That's right. Yeah, I love this. I love sharing with you in this way, and happy to do another one anytime.
Where if folks want to find you for any of the coaching that you mentioned, or your YouTube channels or website, just go down the list of where people can find you and the resources that you've put out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So start with the one that I named, the YouTube channel. It's called Convergence Lifestyle. I've got multiple videos. The most popular ones are my Wim Hof Method breathwork videos. They're really fun. Like I'm a music producer. I write a lot of music. So it's like I wrote all the music for them, and I videoed myself making the music. Sometimes like hitting a stick or a tree as like the drums. So check that out. It's really fun. I've even got a video on how like to respond in emergency situations.
Oh, cool.
Very similar to some of the stuff that we talked about that I made prior to Hurricane Helene, interestingly enough.
Oh,
I could probably make a new version of that since this. Mandala Chocolate, my raw organic superfood chocolate company, mandalanaturals.com. If you want to check out some of the events and programming we're doing here on our 67-acre retreat center where Mandala Chocolate is made, National Forest on 3 sides, mandalasprings.com. And, we're ramping up for the 2026 season right now. We've got a lot of really cool stuff. For example, we're doing a 7-week series right now in nonviolent communication. One of those toolkits I was speaking about that helps unlock this relational intelligence that is necessary in our society.
You're hosting this group on your property?
Yeah, well, I've got a 70-year-old man who's been teaching it for 40 years, actually. Teaching me. Like, we're hosting it on our property, and I am sitting there and soaking up everything I can in my beginner's mind with this. And yeah, lots of really cool stuff coming down the pipeline. We've got a campground if I want to come and
Mm.
camp, we've got a full campground here, and things are really, yeah, things are cranking up. And then beyond that, if anyone's interested in the mentorship that I
Mm.
do in everything that we were talking about today, really, roblenfestey.com is a place that can be looked. But honestly, at the end of the day, you can reach out to me through Mandala Chocolate, through Mandala Springs. However you find a way, there's different ways to be able to get in touch with me.
Okay.
And I'm only working with a handful of people at a time because I really want to be able to go into some deep dives with folks. But it's been tremendously fun and very impactful. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to support people more on a one-on-one. I've been leading retreats and doing things like that for my entire adult life. And the one-on-one work is really special to me.
That's cool. And I would imagine, like most teachers in any venue, the teacher learns as much through the student as the student is learning from the experience. Has that been your case as well?
Arguably more,
More.
Yeah, arguably teaching is the single best way to learn
Hmm.
anything.
Very good. All right, Robbie, I very much appreciate it. And we will do this again.
Looking forward to it.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the On Adventure podcast. Be on the lookout for another episode dropping in a couple weeks. And be sure to go to our YouTube page and subscribe and follow us there, as well as on all the socials from Facebook to Instagram and LinkedIn. Until our next episode, I hope you stay safe and stay on adventure.